Paramatmane Namaha. Yatart Gita. Srimad Bhagavad Gita.
Chapter 18. The Yog of Renunciation. This is the last chapter of the Gita, the first half of which is devoted to the resolution of several questions posed by Arjuna, whereas the latter half is the conclusion which dwells upon the many blessings that flow from this sacred work. Chapter 17 classified and elucidated food, penance, Yagya, charity, and faith. In the same context, however, the different forms of renunciation, or sannyas, have yet not been touched upon. What is the motive for whatever man does? Who is the motivator, God or nature? The question was raised earlier, but the present chapter again sheds light on it. Likewise, the subject of the quadratype, or four-part division of men, was broached earlier, but the present chapter again takes it up and closely analyzes its character within the framework of nature. Then, at the end, numerous advantages that ensue from the Gita are illuminated. After having listened to Krishna's categorization of various subjects in the previous chapter, Arjuna now also desires to be enlightened on the different forms of renunciation, sannyas, and relinquishment, tyag.
Sannyasasya mahabaho tattvamichhami veditum tyagasya cha hrishikesha prithakkeshi nishodhana.
Arjuna said, O the mighty-armed, O Rishikesh, master of the senses and slayer of demons, I am curious to learn the principles of relinquishment and of renunciation. Total abandonment is renunciation, a state in which even will and merits of action cease to be, and prior to which there is only endless giving up of attachment for fulfillment of the spiritual quest. There are two questions here. Arjuna wants to know the essence of renunciation as well as the essence of relinquishment. Thereupon, Yogeshwar Krishna says,
Kamyanam karmanam nyasam sannyasam kavayo viduhu sarva karma phalatyagam prahustyagam vichakshana.
The Lord said, whereas numerous scholars use renunciation for the giving up of coveted deeds, many others of mature judgment use relinquishment to name the abnegation of the fruits of all action.
Tyajam doshavadyeke karma prahurmanishinaha yajna danat tapah karma na tyajamiti chapare.
While many erudite men insist that since all actions are vile, they ought to be forsaken, other scholars proclaim that deeds such as Yagya, charity, and penance ought not to be forsaken. After thus submitting varied opinions on the problem, the Yogeshwar advances his own definitive view.
Nishchayam shrinu me tatra tyage bharata sattama tyago hi purusha vyaghra trividha samprakirtitah.
Listen, O the best of Bharat, Arjuna, to my notion of renunciation, and of how, O you, the unmatched among men, this renunciation is said to be of three kinds.
Yagya dana tapah karma natyajam karyameva tat yagyo danam tapaschaiva pavanani manishinam.
Rather than forsaking them, deeds such as yagya, charity, and penance ought certainly to be undertaken as a duty, for yagya, charity, and penance are deeds that redeem men of wisdom. Krishna has thus submitted four prevalent thoughts. First, that coveted deeds should be forsworn. Second, that the fruits of all action should be given up. Third, that all actions should be relinquished, for they are all blemished. And fourth, that it is wrong to forego yagya, charity, and penance. Expressing his accord with one of these thoughts, Krishna says that it is also his conclusive view that yagya, charity, and penance are not to be forsaken. This illustrates how divergent views on the question were current at Krishna's time also, out of which one was true. Even today, there are many views. When a sage makes his advent or arrival in the world, he isolates and puts forward that which is the most salutary among the many varying doctrines. All great souls have done this, and Krishna has done the same. Instead of advocating a new way, he only supports and expounds that which is true among many accepted views.
Etanyapi tu karmani sangam tyaktva phalani cha कर्तव्यानीति मे पार्थ निश्चितं मतमुत्तमम्.
It is my considered belief, O Parth, that these deeds, as also all others, ought certainly to be accomplished after forsaking attachment and desire for the fruits of labor. Replying to Arjuna's question, Krishna then examines relinquishment.
Niyatasya tu sannyasah karmano nopapadyate mohatasya parityagah tamasah parikirtitah.
And, since the requisite action ought not to be abandoned, forsaking it out of some misconception is deemed as renunciation of the nature of ignorance, tamas. According to Krishna, the ordained essential action is only one, the performance of Yagya. The Yogeshwar has reverted to and stressed the ordained mode time and again, lest the seeker should deviate from the right path. And now he declares that it is improper to abandon this ordained action. Forsaking such action out of some delusion is thus said to be relinquishment of the diabolical kind, that is, of the nature of tamas. The deed that ought to be done and the ordained action are the same, and giving it up out of involvement in objects of sensual pleasure is morally improper. The man who abandons such action is doomed to rebirth in low forms, for he has suppressed the impulse for divine adoration. Krishna next speaks about relinquishment that is tainted by passion and moral blindness, that is of the nature of rajas.
Dukkhamityeva yat karma kaya klesha bhayatyaje sakritva rajasam tyagam naiva tyaga phalam labhe.
He who rashly forgoes action under the assumption that all of it is grievous, or out of fear of physical suffering, is deprived of the merits of his relinquishment. One who is incapable of worship and who casts off action because of his apprehension of physical pain is reckless and morally in error, and his relinquishment of the nature of passion or rajas fails to bring him the ultimate repose of mind that should be the end of relinquishment.
Karyamityeva yat karma niyatam kriyate arjuna sangam tyaktva phalam chaiva satyagas satviko matah.
Only that relinquishment is esteemed righteous, O Arjuna, which is ordained and practiced with the conviction that doing it after having forsaken attachment and fruits of labor is a moral commitment. So only the ordained deed is to be done, and all else has to be discarded. However, shall we go on doing it endlessly, or will there be a point when it too is given up? Speaking of this, Krishna now points out the way of relinquishment that is good and worthwhile.
Nadveshta kushalam karma kushalena anushajjate tyagi sattva samavishto medhavi chinna samshayah.
Gifted with flawless moral excellence and freedom from doubt, one who neither abhors deeds that are unpropitious, nor is enamored of those that are propitious, is wise and self-denying. Only the action prescribed by Scripture is auspicious, and all that is opposed to it is mere bondage of this mortal world, and therefore inauspicious. The person of equanimity, who neither loathes what is inauspicious, nor is attached to that which is auspicious, because for such a person, even that which had to be done has at last come to an end, is imbued with righteousness, emancipated from doubt, and discerning. So such a person is enabled to disown all. This total relinquishment, coming along with accomplishment, is renunciation. Is there, we might be tempted to ask, any easier way? Krishna categorically denies the possibility.
Nahi deha bhrita shakyam tyaktum karmanya sheshatah yastu karma phalatyagi satyagityavidhiyate.
Since the abandonment of all action by an embodied being is impossible, the one who has given up the fruits of action is credited with having practiced relinquishment. Embodied beings does not imply only gross visible bodies. According to Krishna, the three properties of virtue, or sattva, passion, or rajas, and ignorance, or tamas, all born out of nature, imprison the soul within the body. The soul is embodied only so long as these properties remain. So long he will have to pass from one body to another, for the properties that beget the body are still in existence. Since an embodied soul cannot eschew all action, it is said that one who has given up the fruits of action has mastered renunciation. Hence it is that it is imperative to do the prescribed deed and renounce its fruits, so long as the properties that make the body remain. If, on the other hand, actions are undertaken with some desire or the other, they do bear fruits.
Anishtamishtam mishrancha trividham karmana phalam bhavatyattyaginam pretya natu sannyasinam kvachit.
Whereas the triple returns, good, bad, and mixed, of covetous people's actions issue forth even after death, the actions of people who have renounced all do not ever bear any fruits. The deeds of avaricious persons produce consequences that arise even after death. These consequences indeed persist through endless births. But the actions of persons who have relinquished all, of true sannyasi, so called because they have given up all their possessions, do not bear fruits at any time. This is complete renunciation, the highest stage of spiritual seeking. The examination of the outcome of good and bad deeds, and of their ceasing at the point where all desire is annihilated, is thus concluded. Krishna then takes up the causes that effect righteous and unrighteous actions.
Panchaitani mahabaho karanani nibodhame Sankhye kritante proktani siddhaye sarva karmanam.
Learn well from me, O the mighty-armed Arjuna, the 5 principles that Sankhya acknowledges as accomplishers of all action.
अधिष्ठानं तथा कर्ता करणं च पृथग्विधम् विविधाश्च पृथक् चेष्टा दैवं चैवात्र पंचमम्.
In respect of this, there are the prime mover, the several agents, the varied endeavors, the sustaining power, and likewise the fifth means, that is providence. The mind is the doer. Virtuous and evil inclinations are the agents. Performance of righteous action demands a predisposition to discernment, non-attachment, tranquility, self-restraint, sacrifice, and constant meditation. But lust, anger, infatuation, aversion, and avarice are the agents that effect unrighteous deeds. There are then the manifold efforts, the endless desires, and the means. That aspiration begins to be fulfilled which is supported by means. And last of all, there is the fifth principle, providence or sanskar, the outcome of all that has happened to the soul in the past. This is borne out by Krishna.
शरीरवाङ् मनोभिर्यत् कर्म प्रारभते नरः न्यायं वा विपरीतं वा पञ्चैते तस्य हेतवः.
These are the five causes of whatever action a man accomplishes with his mind, speech, and body, either in accordance with or even in contravention of Scripture.
Tatraivam sati kartaram Atmanam kevalam tu yaha Pashyatya krita buddhitvan Nasa pashyati durmatihi.
Despite this, however, he who out of his immature judgment views the consummate, detached self as the doer, is dull-minded, and he sees not. As the soul is identical with God, the pronouncement also implies that God does not act. This is the second time that the Yogeshwar has stressed the point. He said in chapter 5 that God neither acts himself nor impels others to act, nor does he bring about even the association of actions. Then why do we say that everything is done by God? It is only because our minds are clouded by delusion. We just say whatever comes to our mind. However, as Krishna has affirmed, there are 5 causes of action. Yet the ignorant man, incapable of perceiving the reality, views the lone, godlike soul as the doer. He fails to realize that God does not perform any deed. Paradoxically, however, while saying all this, Krishna also girds up his loins for Arjuna and assures him that he has just to play the part of an instrument, for he, Krishna, is the real doer, arbiter. What, after all, is the sage's import here? In truth, there is a line of gravity that separates God from nature. So long as the seeker is within the boundaries of nature, of the 3 properties, God does not act. While abiding close by the worshipper, he is yet only an onlooker. But when the seeker gets hold of the cherished goal with firm intentness, God begins to regulate his inner life. The seeker then breaks free from the gravity of nature and enters the realm of God. God ever stands by such a seeker, but he acts only for a worshipper such as this. So let us always meditate on him.
यस्य नाहं कृतो भावो बुद्धिर्यस्य न लिप्यते हत्वापि स इमान् लोकान् न हन्ति न निबध्यते.
Though he may slay, the man who is liberated from conceit and whose mind is unsullied is neither a killer nor bound by his action. Rather than granting license to kill without any fear, this verse signifies that the truly liberated person acts as a mere instrument of the Supreme Spirit. Such a person may sometimes be compelled to do even violent and awesome deeds, like Arjuna, but he undertakes them in a wholly detached and selfless spirit, as well as with the conviction that doing them is his bounden duty. So although such a liberated person slays from the worldly point of view, he does not really slay. In truth, however, one who dwells in constant awareness of God is of necessity disinclined to anything that is evil. Such a person is simply not tempted to destroy, for the world which tempts people to destroy no longer exists for him because of his total renunciation of the aggregate of all his deeds.
Jnanam gyeyam parigyata trividha karma chodana karanam karma karteti trividha karma sangraha.
Whereas the way of securing knowledge, the worthwhile knowledge, and the knower constitute the threefold inspiration to action, the doer, the agents, and the action itself are the threefold constituents of action. Arjuna is told that the impetus to action is derived from all-knowing seers, the mode of acquiring knowledge, and the object that is worthy of being acquired. Krishna has said earlier that he is the object worth knowing. The stimulus to action is derived only when there is a realized sage with perfect knowledge who can initiate the seeker into the way by which the desired knowledge can be obtained, and when the seeker's eyes are fixed on his goal. Similarly, the store of action begins to grow by the coming together of the doer, dedication of mind, agents such as wisdom, disinterest in the material world, repose, and self-restraint by which the action is accomplished, and awareness of the action. It has been pointed out earlier that neither does the undertaking of action by the seeker after accomplishment have any purpose, nor is there any loss even in its abandonment. Yet he engages in action even then for the generation of virtuous powers in the hearts of those who are left behind. This is effected by the confluence of the doer, the agents, and the action itself. Knowledge, action, and the doer are also each of three kinds.
Jnanam karma cha karta cha त्रिधैव गुणभेदतः प्रोच्यते गुणसंख्याने यथावच्छृणुतान्यपि.
Listen to me well on how even knowledge and action and the doer have been graded into three kinds each in the Sankhya philosophy of properties, or gun. The next verse throws light upon the character of virtuous knowledge.
सर्वभूतेषु येनैकम् भावमव्ययमीक्षते अविभक्तं विभक्तेषु तद्ज्ञानं विद्धि सात्विकम्.
O Arjuna, you should know that knowledge as immaculate, sattvic, by which one perceives the reality of the indestructible God as an undivided entity in all divided beings. Such knowledge is direct perception, with which the properties of nature come to an end. It marks the culmination of awareness. Let us now see knowledge of the second kind, or rajas.
पृथक्त्वेन तु यद्ज्ञानम् नानाभावान् पृथग्विधान् वेत्ति सर्वेषु भूतेषु तद्ज्ञानं विद्धि राजसम्.
Know that knowledge as tainted by passion, by which one perceives divided entities in all separate beings.
Yattu kritsnavadekasmin कार्ये सक्तमहैतुकम् अतत्त्वार्थवदल्पञ्च तत्तामसमुदारितम्.
And know that knowledge as besmirched by ignorance, or tamas, which adheres to the body alone, as if it were the whole truth, and which is irrational, unfounded on truth, and petty. Devoid of wisdom and the required discipline to buttress it, this kind of knowledge, tamas, is worthless, as it takes one away from awareness of God, who is the one and only reality. The following verses then recount the three kinds of action.
नियतं संगरहितं अरागद्वेषतः कृतं अफलप्रेप्सुना कर्म यत्तत् सात्विकमुच्यते.
That action is said to be immaculate, which is ordained and embarked on with detachment by one who is free from infatuation as well as loathing, and who does not aspire to any reward. The ordained action is none other than worship and meditation that lead the soul to God.
यत्तु कामेप्सुना कर्म साहंकारेण वा पुनः क्रियते बहुलायासम् तद्राजसमुदारितम्.
And that action is said to be of the nature of passion, which is strenuous and entered upon by one who covets rewards and is egotistic. This seeker also performs the ordained action, but what a great difference is made by the fact that he is desirous of rewards and possessed of vanity. So the action undertaken by him is of the character of moral blindness.
Anubandham kshayam himsam anavekshya cha paurusham mohadarabhyate karma yattattamasamuchyate.
That action is said to be unenlightened, which is taken up out of sheer ignorance and with disregard for outcome, loss to oneself and injury to others, as well as for one's own competence. Such action is bound to be reduced to nothingness at last, and it is unquestionably not approved by Scripture. Rather than action, it is mere delusion. Let us now see the attributes of the doer.
Mukta sango naham vadi drityutsaha samanvitaha siddhya siddhyor nirvikaraha karta satvika uchyate.
That doer is said to be of immaculate nature, who is free from attachment, who does not indulge in arrogant speech, and who is endowed with patience and vigor, as well as unswayed by success and failure. These are the attributes of the righteous doer, and the action he undertakes is, of course, the same ordained action.
Ragi karma phala prepsuhu lubdho hingsatmako shuchihi harsha shokanvitah karta rajasa parikirtitah.
That doer is said to be of the attribute of passion, who is impulsive, covetous of the fruits of action, acquisitive, pernicious, vitiated, and subject to joy and sorrow.
Ayuktah prakritah stabdhaha Shatho naishkritiko lasaha Vishadi dirgha sutri cha Karta tamas uchyate.
That doer is said to be of the attribute of ignorance, who is fickle, uncouth, vain, devious, spiteful, dispirited, lazy, and procrastinating. These are the attributes of the ignorant doer. The scrutiny of the qualities of doers is concluded at this point, and Yogeshwar Krishna now embarks on an examination of the attributes of judgment, intellect, resolve, steadfastness, and felicity, happiness.
अयुक्तः प्राकृतः स्तब्धः शठो नैष्कृतिको लसः विषादी दीर्घसूत्री च कर्ता तामस उच्यते.
That
बुद्धेर्भेदं धृतेश्चैव गुणतस्त्रिविधं शृणु प्रोच्यमानमशेषेण पृथक्त्वेन धनञ्जय.
Listen to me too, O Dhananjay, Arjun, on the threefold classification according to the properties of nature, as I make them exhaustively and respectively, of intellect, steadfastness, and happiness.
Pravrittin cha nivrittin cha karya karye bhaya bhaye bandham moksham cha ya veti buddhissa partha satviki.
That intellect is immaculate, O Parth, which is aware of the essence, of the way of inclination, as also of renunciation, of worthy and unworthy action, of fear and fearlessness, and of bondage and liberation. In other words, the righteous, morally good intellect is that which is aware of the distinction between the way that leads to God and the way to recurrent birth and death.
Yaya dharmam adharmam cha karyam cha karyameva cha ayathavat prajanati buddhissa partha rajasi.
That intellect is of the nature of passion and moral blindness, O Part, by which one cannot even know the righteous and the unrighteous, as well as what is worthy or unworthy of being done.
Adharmam dharmamitiya manyate tamasavrita sarvarthan viparitamscha buddhissa partha tamasi.
That intellect is of the nature of ignorance, O Parth, which is enveloped in darkness, and which apprehends the sinful as virtuous, and views everything in a distorted way. In these verses 30 through 32, intellect is graded into three kinds. The intellect which is well aware of the action that has to be engaged in, and the action that has to be shunned, as well as of that which is fit or unfit to be done, is characterized by moral excellence. The intellect which has only a dim perception of the righteous and the unrighteous action, and which does not know the truth, is dominated by passion. The perverse intellect that deems the sinful as virtuous, the destructible as eternal, and the inauspicious as auspicious, is shrouded in the gloom of ignorance. The discussion of intellect is concluded here, and Krishna next takes up the three kinds of steadfastness.
Dhrityaya dharayate manah pranendriya kriya yogena vyabhicharinya धृतिः सा पार्थ सात्विकी.
That resolute steadfastness by which, O Parth, one governs through the practice of yoga, operations of the mind, the life breaths, and the senses, is immaculate. Yoga is the process of meditation, whereas the coming into mind of any impulse other than the impulse to such contemplation is moral transgression. Straying of the mind is deviation from the path of virtue. The unwavering resolution with which a man rules over his mind, breath, and senses is therefore of the nature of goodness. Directing the mind, the vital breaths, and the senses towards the desired goal is the morally excellent fortitude.
यया तु धर्म कामार्थान् धृत्या धारयतेऽर्जुन प्रसंगेन फलाकांक्षी धृतिः सा पार्थ राजसी.
That steadfastness, O Parth, by which the avaricious man holds fast and acquisitively to obligations, wealth, and pleasure, is of the nature of passion and moral blindness. Firmness of will in this case is concerned primarily with the discharging of one's worldly duties, acquisition of wealth, and sensual pleasure, the three primary objects of material life, rather than with final liberation. The final end may be the same, but in this case the seeker aspires to fruits and desires something in return for his labor.
यया स्वप्नं भयं शोकम् विषादं मदमेव च न विमुञ्चति दुर्मेधा धृतिः सा पार्थ तामसी.
And that steadfastness, O Parth, by which the evil-minded man declines to forsake sloth, fear, worry, grief, and also arrogance, is of the nature of ignorance. Next, Krishna considers the three types of happiness.
Sukham tvidanim trividham Shrinu me bharatarshava Abhyasadramate yatra Dukkhantan cha nigacchati.
Now listen to me, O the best of Bharat, Arjuna, on how even happiness, which one comes to dwell in by practice, and thus achieve the cessation of griefs, is also of three kinds. This happiness is that which the seeker attains to by spiritual discipline. He achieves it by concentrating his mind on the cherished goal, and this happiness is therefore a destroyer of griefs.
Yattadagre vishamiva pariname mritopamam tatsukham satvikam proktam atma buddhi prasadajam.
That happiness, which is at first like poison, but finally tastes like nectar, for it issues forth from the lucidity of an intellect that has realized the self, is of an impeccable nature. The happiness that is come by through spiritual exercise, concentration of mind on the desired end, and in which all griefs come to an end, is bitter like venom at the commencement of worship. Prahlad was hanged and Mira was poisoned. Sant Kabir has pointed out the difference between the pleasure-loving world that feasts and falls into unconscious slumber, and himself who stays awake shedding tears of contrition. But although this happiness is like poison at the outset, at the end it is like nectar that confers the substance of immortality. Such happiness, born out of a clear understanding of the self, is said to be pure.
Vishayendriya Sanyoga Yattadagre Mritopamam Pariname Vishamiva Tatsukham Rajasam Smritam.
That happiness which springs from the association of the senses with their objects, and which is like nectar at the beginning, but like gall at the end, is said to be tainted with passion and moral blindness. The happiness obtained from the contact of the senses with their objects tastes like nectar in the course of enjoyment, but like poison at the end. For this kind of happiness leads to repeated birth and death. So such happiness is rightly said to be impassioned and afflicted with moral blindness.
Yadagre chanubandhe cha Sukham mohanamatmanaha Nidralasya pramadotham Tattamasamudaritam.
That happiness which both initially and finally beguiles the self, and which arises from slumber, lethargy, and negligence, is said to be of the nature of ignorance. The happiness which both in the course of indulgence and subsequently deludes the soul, lays one unconscious in the dark night of worldly life, and which is born out of indolence and futile efforts, is of the nature of ignorance. Krishna then proceeds to recount the scope of the properties of nature that ever pursue us.
Na tadasti prithivyam va divi deveshu va punaha sattvam prakriti jair muktam yadebhisyat tribhir gunaihi.
There is no being, either on earth or among the dwellers of heaven, who is entirely free from the three properties born of nature. All beings, right from Brahma at the top to worms and insects at the lowest, are transient, mortal, and under the sway of the three properties, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Even heavenly beings, including the various external gods, are subject to the malady of these properties. Here, Yogeshwar Krishna has taken up the subject of external gods for the fourth time. That is, gods were spoken of in chapters 7, 9, and 17. All the statements so far made by Krishna imply that the gods are influenced by the three properties of nature. Those who worship such gods, in reality, worship that which is perishable and impermanent. In the third section of Srimad Bhagavat, while describing the meeting of 9 Yogeshwars with the exalted sage Shukra, during the discourses, the sage Shukra said that for love between male and female, the Lord Shankar and his consort Parvati, for sound health, the Ashwani Kumars, the celestial physician twins, for victory, the Lord Indra, Lord God of heaven, and for material riches, Kuber, God protector of wealth. These external gods are to be worshipped. Similarly, talking of various desires at the end, he gave the verdict that for fulfillment of all desires and for salvation, one shall worship the Lord Narayan alone. Therefore, one shall remember and call to mind the Omnipresent One, and for such accomplishment, the only available means is to take refuge in an accomplished teacher, asking sincere questions and rendering service. The devilish and divine treasures are two traits of the inner realm, out of which the divine treasures enable one to have the great vision of the Supreme Being. Hence, they are called divine, but yet are within the influence of the three properties of nature. When the three properties of nature are pacified, the seeker also shall experience that absolute peace within. After this, that immortal yogi shall have no more duties left to perform. The question of the organization of men into 4 classes, or varna, that was initiated much earlier is now reintroduced. Is one's class determined by birth, or is it the name of the inner ability gained from one's action?
Brahmana kshatriya visham Shudranam cha parantapa Karmani pravibhaktani Swabhava prabhavair gunaihi.
The duties of Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, as also of Shudra, are determined by properties that are born out of their nature. If a man's nature is made up of the property of goodness, there is inner purity along with the ability to meditate and worship. If the dominating property is that of ignorance, lethargy, sleep, and insanity are the outcome, and the attempted action is at their level. The capacity of one's natural property is his varna, his character. Similarly, a partial combination of goodness and passion constitute the Kshatriya class, whereas a partial combination of the property of ignorance and that of passion constitutes the Vaishya class. This is the 4th time when Yogeshwar Krishna has taken up the issue. He named Kshatriya in chapter 2 and said that there is nothing more propitious for a Kshatriya than a righteous war, in verse 31. In chapter 3, he said that although inferior in merit, one's own natural calling, dharma, is the best, and even meeting with death while upholding it results in good, whereas an obligation or duty other than one's own, even though well observed, generates nothing but fear and dread, in verse 35. In chapter 4, then, he indicated that he is the creator of the 4 classes in verse 13. Does he mean by this that he has divided men into 4 rigid castes determined by birth? His answer to the question is an emphatic no, and he asserts that he has but divided action into 4 categories according to their inherent properties. The innate property of a being or object is a measure, a yardstick, so the division of mankind into 4 varna is only a division of the one and same action into 4 stages according to the motivating properties. In Krishna's words, action is the mode of attaining to the one inexpressible God. The conduct that takes one to God is worship, which commences in faith in the desired end. So meditation on the Supreme Being is the one true action that Krishna has divided into 4 steps in his system of Varn. Now, how are we to know to which property and stage we belong? This is what Krishna turns to in the following verses.
शमोदमस्तपश्शौचम् क्षान्तिरार्जवमेव च ज्ञानं विज्ञानमास्तिक्यम् ब्रह्म कर्म स्वभावजम्.
Self-restraint, subduing of the senses, innocence, continence, mercy, uprightness, piety, true knowledge, and direct perception of divinity are the Brahman's province, born out of his nature. Restraining the mind, curbing the senses, flawless purity, mortification of mind, speech, and body to mold them in tune with the cherished goal, forgiveness, all-pervading righteousness, staunch faith in the one aimed at goal, consciousness of the Supreme Being, the awakening in the realm of the heart of the exhortations coming from God, and the ability to act according to them, are all a Brahman's obligations that arise from his own nature. It might be said, therefore, that the seeker is a Brahman when all these merits are present in him, and the commenced action is an integral part of his nature.
शौर्यं तेजो धृतिर्दाक्ष्यम् युद्धे चाप्यपलायनम् दानमीश्वरभावश्च क्षात्रं कर्म स्वभावजम्.
Valor, majesty, dexterity, unwillingness to retreat in battle, charity, and sovereignty are the natural province of a Kshatriya. Bravery, achievement of divine glory, forbearance, competence in meditation, skill in action, disinclination to run away from struggle with the material world, relinquishment of all, and domination of all feelings by a feeling for the Supreme Being. These are all activities born out
कृषिगौरक्षवाणिज्यम् वैश्यकर्म स्वभावजम् परिचर्यात्मकं कर्म शूद्रस्यापि स्वभावजम्.
farming, protection of cows, the senses, and commerce are the natural province of a Vaishya, whereas rendering service is the natural calling of a Shudra. Agriculture, rearing of cattle, and commerce are duties in keeping with the nature of a Vaishya. Why only preservation of cows? Should we slaughter buffaloes? Is it wrong to keep goats? There is nothing at all like all of this. In the ancient Vedic text, the word go, or cow, was used to refer to the senses. So protection of, quote, cows here means care of the senses. The senses are protected by discernment, non-attachment, restraint, and steadfastness. They are, on the other hand, riven and rendered feeble by lust, wrath, avarice, and attachment. Spiritual acquisition is the only true wealth. This is our one true asset, and once it has been earned, it stays on with us forever. Gradual amassing of this wealth in the course of our struggle with the world of matter or nature is trade. The acquisition of knowledge, which is the most precious of all riches, is commerce. And what is meant by the word farming? The body is like a piece of earth. The seeds which are sown in it sprout in the form of sanskar, the merits of action, the force that is built up by all the actions in previous lives. Arjuna is told that the seed, the initial impulse of selfless action, is never destroyed. Vaishya is the third step of the ordained action, of contemplation of the Supreme Being, and preservation of the seeds of divine meditation that are sown in this patch of earth, the body, while at the same time opposing hostile impulses, is agriculture. As Goswami Tulsidas has said, whereas the wise husbandman farms well and with care, they who are of deficient wisdom are insensible and arrogant. To protect the senses thus, to store spiritual wealth amidst the skirmishes of nature, and to always strengthen contemplation of the ultimate essence, these meanings of trade, commerce, farming, and agriculture, these are the province of Vaishya. According to Krishna, the Omnipresent God is the final outcome of Yagya. The devout souls who partake of this fruit are emancipated from all sins, and it is the seeds of this action that are sown by the meditative process. To protect this germ is true husbandry. In Vedic writings, food means the Supreme Spirit. God is the only real sustenance, the food. The soul is fully placated at the completion of the exercise of contemplation and never again knows any craving. Once the exercise has been brought to successful conclusion, the soul is freed from the cycle of birth and death. To go ahead sowing the seeds of this food is true husbandry. To serve those who have attained to a higher spiritual status, revered men of accomplishment, this is the duty of Shudra. Rather than meaning base or low, Shudra means one with deficient knowledge. It is the seeker at the lowest stage who is a Shudra. It is but proper that this initiate worshipper should begin his quest with rendering service. Service to men of accomplishment will in the course of time generate nobler impulses in him, and he will thus gradually move up to the higher Vaishya, Kshatriya, and Brahmin stages. And ultimately he will go beyond Varn, the properties of nature, and become one with God. Character is a dynamic entity. There is change in an individual's Varn along with changes in his character. So in fact, Varn are the four, excellent, good, medium, and low, stages, the four steps, low and high, which seekers who tread the path of action have to climb. This is so because the action in question is only one, the ordained action. The only way to final attainment, according to Krishna, is that the worshipper should begin his journey in keeping with the attributes of his own nature.
स्वे स्वे कर्मण्यभिरतः संसिद्धिं लभते नरः स्वकर्मनिरतः सिद्धिम् यथा विन्दति तच्छृणु.
Commitment to his own inborn duty brings man to the ultimate accomplishment, and you should listen to me on how a man achieves perfection through dedication to his innate calling. The perfection that is ultimately achieved is realization of God. Krishna told Arjuna earlier also that he would reach this final goal by engaging in action, the real prescribed action.
यतः प्रवृत्तिर्भूतानां येन सर्वमिदं ततम् स्वकर्मणा तमभ्यर्च्य सिद्धिं विन्दति मानवः.
By adoration of that God who has created all beings and who pervades the whole universe, through the undertaking of his natural calling, man attains to final accomplishment. The seeker achieves final consummation through performance of his native duties. It is therefore essential that he should constantly keep his mind fixed on God, adore him, and proceed on his way step by step. Instead of making any gain, a junior student even loses whatever he has if he sits in a senior class. So the law is that one should climb step by step. It was said in the 6th verse of this chapter that Yagya, charity, and penance ought to be undertaken after abandonment of attachment and the fruits of action. Now, stressing the same point, Krishna says again that even a partially enlightened man ought to begin from the same point, from self-surrender to God.
श्रेयान् स्वधर्मो विगुणः परधर्मात् स्वनुष्ठितात् स्वभावनियतं कर्म कुर्वन्नाप्नोति किल्बिषम्.
Even though unmeritorious, one's own native calling is superior to the office of others, for a man carrying out his natural obligation does not bring sin upon himself. Although inferior, one's own obligation is better than even the well-performed duties of others. A man absorbed in performing a task that is determined by his own nature does not incur sin insofar as he is not subjected to the endless cycle of entrances and exits, of birth and death. It is quite often that worshippers begin to feel disenchanted with the service they are rendering. They look at the more accomplished seekers who are absorbed in meditation and grow envious of the honor that is accorded them because of their merits. So novices at once fall to imitating. According to Krishna, however, imitation or envy can be of no avail. The final accomplishment is only by dedication to one's own native calling, not by its abandonment.
Sahajam karma kaunteya sadoshamapi natyaje sarvarambha hi doshena dhumenagnirivavrita.
One's innate duty ought not to be forsaken, O son of Kunti, even if it is blemished, because all actions are impaired by some flaw or the other, as fire is shrouded by smoke. It is but expected that the actions of the novice seeker are flawed, for their doer is yet far from perfection. But even these actions must not be given up. Moreover, there is no action that is unimpeachable, and action has to be undertaken even by one who belongs to the Brahmin class. Imperfections, the obscuring pall of nature, are there until there is steady devotion. They come to an end only when the action natural to a Brahmin is dissipated in God. But what are the attributes of the accomplisher at the point where action is no longer of any avail?
Asakta buddhi sarvatra jitatma vigata spriha naishkarmya siddhim paramam sanyasenadhigacchati.
He whose intellect is aloof all round, who is without desire, and who has conquered his mind, attains to the ultimate state that transcends all action through renunciation. Renunciation is, as we have already seen, complete self-abnegation. It is the condition in which the seeker abandons whatever he has, and only then does he reach the point when no further action is needed. Renunciation and attainment of the supreme state of actionlessness are indeed synonymous. The yogi who has reached the state of actionlessness attains to the Supreme Being.
Siddhim prapto yatha brahma tathapnoti nibodhame samase naiva kaunteya nishtha jnanasya ya para.
Learn in brief from me, O son of Kunti, of how one who is immaculate achieves realization of the Supreme Being, which represents the culmination of knowledge. The following verses expound that way.
Buddhya vishuddhaya yukto dhrityatmanam niyamya cha shabdadin vishayams tyaktva ragadveshau vyudasya cha.
Blessed with a pure intellect, firmly in command of the self, with objects of sensual gratification like sound forsaken, with both fondness and revulsion destroyed.
Vivikta sevi lagvashi yatavakaya manasaha dhyana yoga paro nityam vairagyam samupashritah.
Dwelling in seclusion, eating frugally, subdued in mind, speech, and body, incessantly given to the Yog of Meditation, firmly resigned.
Ahankaram balam darpam kamam krodham parigraham vimucya nirmama shanto brahma bhuyaya kalpate.
Giving up conceit, arrogance of power, yearning, ill humor, and acquisitiveness, devoid of attachment, and in possession of a mind at repose, a man is worthy of becoming one with God. It is further said of such a worshipper,
Brahma bhuta prasannatma na shochati na kankshati samasarveshu bhuteshu madbhaktim labhate param.
In this serene tempered man, who views all beings equally, who abides intently in the Supreme Being, neither grieving over nor hankering after anything, there is fostered a faith in me that transcends all else. Now faith is at the stage where an outcome can ensue from it, namely, in the form of God realization.
Bhaktya mam abhijanati yavanyascha tattvataha tato mam tattvato gyatva vishate tadanantaram.
Through his transcendental faith, he knows my essence well, what my reach is, and having thus known my essence, he is at once united with me. The Supreme Being is perceived at the moment of attainment, and no sooner has this perception come about than the worshipper finds his own soul blessed with the attributes of God himself, that his soul is, like God, indestructible, immortal, eternal, ineffable, and universal. When the maladies of vanity, brute power, lust, wrath, arrogance, and infatuation that force one down into the ravines of nature are rendered feeble, and virtues such as discernment, non-attachment, self-restraint, firmness of will, abiding in solitude, and meditation that lead one to God are fully developed and active, the seeker is equipped to be united with the Supreme Being. It is this ability that is called transcendental faith, and it is by this that the worshipper comes to apprehend the ultimate reality. He then knows what God is, and, knowing his divine glories, he is at once merged with him. Putting it differently, Brahm, reality, God, the Supreme Spirit, and the Self are all substitutes for each other. Knowing any one of them, we come to know them all. This is the final accomplishment, the final liberation, the final goal. So the Gita is unambiguous in its view that in both the way of knowledge or discernment, or the way of renunciation, and the way of selfless action, the ordained deed, meditation, has to be entered upon and accomplished for the attainment of the supreme state of actionlessness. The importance of worship and meditation for the worshipper who has renounced all has been stressed so far. And now, by introducing the idea of devotion, the same is said for the yogi who undertakes selfless action.
Sarva karmanyapi sada कुर्वाणो मद्व्यपाश्रयः मत्प्रसादादवाप्नोति शाश्वतं पदमव्ययम्.
Although engaged in action wholeheartedly, one who finds refuge in me achieves the everlasting, indestructible, final bliss. The deed to be performed is the same, the ordained action, the exercise of Yagya, and to gain it, there must be self-surrender.
चेतसा सर्वकर्माणि मयि सन्न्यस्य मत्परः बुद्धियोगमुपाश्रित्य मच्चित्तः सततं भव.
Earnestly resigning all your deeds to me, finding shelter in me, and embracing the yoga of knowledge, you should ever fix your mind on me. Arjuna is counseled to sincerely yield all his actions, whatever he is capable of doing, to Krishna, to rest in his mercy rather than depend upon his own prowess, to find shelter in Krishna, to adopt the attitude of yoga, and always bring his mind to bear on him. Yoga means completion, unity, that which brings griefs to an end and provides access to God. Its mode also is a unity, the exercise of Yagya, which is founded on restraint of the attaching impulses of the mind and senses, the regulation of the incoming and outgoing breath, and on meditation. Its outcome, finally, also is a unity with the eternal God. This is further elaborated in the next verse.
मच्चित्तः सर्वदुर्गाणि मत्प्रसादात् तरिष्यसि अथ चेत्त्वमहङ्कारान् न श्रोष्यसि विनङ्क्ष्यसि.
Ever resting on me, you will be saved from all afflictions and gain deliverance, but you shall be destroyed if out of arrogance you do not pay heed to my words. Thus, always focusing his mind on Krishna, Arjuna will conquer the citadels of the mind and the senses. As Goswami Tulsidas has put it, even celestial beings seated at the portals of these forts obstinately keep the shutters ajar as the breezes of carnal pleasure blow in. The mind and the senses at the core are the impregnable redoubts, but Arjuna can storm them by aiming his thoughts at God alone. On the other hand, however, he shall be undone and deprived of the ultimate good if out of vanity he does not pay heed to Krishna's words. This point is now reaffirmed.
यदहङ्कारमाश्रित्य न योत्स्य इति मन्यसे मिथ्यैष व्यवसायस्ते प्रकृतिस्त्वां नियोक्ष्यति.
Your egotistic resolve not to fight is surely mistaken, for your nature will compel you to take up arms in the war.
स्वभावजेन कौन्तेय निबद्धस्वेन कर्मणा कर्तुं नेच्छसि यन्मोहात् करिष्यस्य वशोऽपि तत्.
Bound by your natural calling, even against your resolve, O son of Kunti, you will have to undertake the deed you are reluctant to do because of your self-deception. Arjuna's innate disinclination to retreat from the battle with nature will compel him to set upon the task before him. The subject is concluded with this, and Krishna next speaks on the dwelling of God.
ईश्वरः सर्वभूतानां हृद्देशेऽर्जुन तिष्ठति भ्रामयन् सर्वभूतानि यन्त्रारूढानि मायया.
Propelling all living things that bestride a body, which is but a contrivance, by his Maya, O Arjuna, God abides in the hearts of all beings. But if God lives in our hearts and is close to us, why are we ignorant of his presence? This is so because the contraptions we call body are driven by the power of Maya, the universal ignorance or illusion, by virtue of which we consider the unreal universe as real and distinct from the Supreme Spirit. So this physical mechanism is a grave impediment, and it takes us round endlessly through one birth after another. Where, then, can we find shelter or refuge?
तमेव शरणं गच्छ सर्वभावेन भारत तत्प्रसादात् परां शान्तिम् स्थानं प्राप्स्यसि शाश्वतम्.
Seek refuge with all your heart, O Bharat Arjuna, in that God by whose grace you will attain to repose and the everlasting, ultimate bliss. So if we have to meditate, we should do it within the realm of the heart. If we know this, and yet seek for God in a temple, mosque, or church, we but waste our time. Notwithstanding this, however, as it was said earlier also, these places of formal worship have their importance for seekers with inadequate awareness. The heart is the true abode of God.
Iti te jnanamakhyatam guhyat guhyataram maya vimrushyaitadasheshena yathechasi tatha kuru.
Thus have I imparted to you the knowledge which is the most mysterious of all abstruse learning. So reflect well on the whole of it, and then you may do as you wish. The wisdom that Krishna has accorded is the truth. It marks the sphere where the seeker has to make his quest, and it is also the point of attainment. Yet the harsh fact is that God is commonly not perceptible. Krishna now deliberates upon the way out of this difficulty.
Sarva guhyatamam bhuyah shrinu me paramam vachah इष्टोऽसि मे दृढमिति ततो वक्ष्यामि ते हितम्.
Listen yet again to my most secret words. Indeed, felicitous, that I am going to speak to you because you are the dearest to me. Krishna endeavors once more to enlighten Arjuna. God always stands by the seeker, for he is so dear to him. Arjuna is beloved of Krishna, and any benediction that the Lord bestows upon him cannot be too much. He will incessantly exert himself for the sake of his devotee. But what is the blessed revelation that Krishna is going to make to Arjuna?
Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru Mame vaishyasi satyante pratijane priyosi me.
I give you my sincere pledge, because you are so dear to me, that you must attain to me if you keep me in mind, adore me, worship me, and bow in obeisance to me. Arjuna was exhorted earlier to seek refuge in the God that dwells in the realm of the heart, and now he is prompted to find shelter under Krishna. He is also told that in order to find this sanctuary, he has to listen again to the Lord's most esoteric words. Does not Krishna intend to communicate by this that finding shelter under a noble teacher-preceptor is indispensable for the seeker who has taken to the spiritual path? Krishna, himself a Yogeshwar, then enlightens Arjuna on the way of true self-surrender.
Sarvadharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja aham tva sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shuchah.
Grieve not, for I shall free you from all sins if you abandon all other obligations and seek refuge in me alone. Arjuna is counseled that he has to rid himself of concern about what category of doer he is, whether Brahman or Kshatriya or Vaishya or Shudra, and look for shelter under Krishna alone. By doing so, he will be absolved of all iniquities and afflictions. The accomplished teacher-preceptor takes it upon himself to effect the gradual elevation of the pupil to ever more refined spiritual states and his release from all sins, if, instead of worrying about his position on the path of action, the pupil single-mindedly seeks refuge in his mentor and looks up to no one else but his accomplished teacher-preceptor. All sages have said the same. When a holy writing is rendered, it may appear that it is for all, but it is truly secret teaching. Secret undoubtedly because it is permitted only to those who are spiritually equipped to study and profit by it. Arjuna is such a deserving pupil, and so it is that Krishna instructs him so earnestly. Now Krishna himself elaborates the merits of the worthy pupil.
Idam te na tapaskaya na bhaktaya kadachana na cha shushrushave vacham न च मां योऽभ्यसूयति.
This Gita, which has been articulated for you, must never be made known to one who is bereft of penance, devotion, and of willingness to listen, as also to one who speaks ill of me. Krishna was a realized sage, and along with adorers, he must also have faced some slanderers. The Gita is not for people who speak maliciously of God. But then, to whom should this sacred knowledge be made known?
Ya imam paramam guhyam madbhakteshvabhidhasyati bhaktim mai param kritva mame vaishyatya samshayah.
The one who, with firm devotion to me, imparts this most secret teaching to my worshippers, will doubtlessly attain to me. And then Krishna speaks about the one who disseminates the sacred knowledge.
Na cha tasman manusyeshu kaschin me priyakrittamah bhavita na cha me tasmad anyah priyataro bhuvi.
Neither is there among mankind any doer who is dearer to me than this man, nor will there be any in the world who is dearer to me than him. The man who enlightens Krishna's devotees, souls who adhere to the Lord, is the most beloved of him, because he is the only source of benediction, the only highway that leads one to God. He is the one who teaches men to go along the right path.
Adhyeshyate chaya imam dharmyam samvadamavayoh jnana yagyena tenaham ishtasyamiti me matihi.
And it is my belief that I shall have been worshipped through the Yagya of knowledge by one who makes a thorough study of this sacred dialogue between us. The Yagya of knowledge is that the outcome of which is wisdom. The nature of this wisdom has been elaborated earlier. This wisdom is the awareness that is acquired along with direct perception of God. And it is with such wisdom, such awareness, that the dedicated and industrious disciple of the Gita will adore Krishna. This is something of which the Lord is firmly assured.
Shraddhavananasuyascha Srinuyadapi yo naraha Sopi mukta shubhan lokan Prapnuyat punya karmana.
Even he will be freed from sins who just hears the Gita with devoutness and without any ill will, and he will secure the worlds of the righteous. Even hearing the teachings of the Gita with faith and without any carping is enough to elevate one to a superior mode of existence, for by this also its sacred precepts will be inculcated in the mind. Krishna has thus, in verses 67 to 71 of the present chapter, said that imparting of the teachings of the Gita to the deserving is as vital as withholding them from the undeserving. Since even hearing the secret teaching of the Gita motivates the worshipper to the required endeavor, the one who just hears it will also surely attain to Krishna. As for the one who propagates the scripture, no one else is dearer to the Lord than this man. The man who studies the Gita worships Krishna by the Yagya of knowledge. True knowledge is what issues forth from the process called Yagya. In the verses under consideration, therefore, the Lord has pointed out the benefits of study, dissemination, and hearing of the Gita. Now, at the end, he asks Arjuna if he has understood and assimilated his words.
Kachide tachrutam partha tvayaiकाग्रेण चेतसा कच्चिदज्ञानसम्मोहः प्रणष्टस्ते धनञ्जय.
Have you, O Parth, listened intently to my words, and, O Dhananjay, is your delusion born out of ignorance dispelled?
नष्टो मोहः स्मृतिर्लब्धा त्वत्प्रसादान्मयाच्युत स्थितोऽस्मि गतसन्देहः करिष्ये वचनं तव.
Arjuna said, "Since my ignorance has been dispelled by your grace, O Achyut, and I have recovered discernment, I am free from doubt and shall follow your precepts." Arjuna here states, "Because of your grace, my passion is destroyed. I have regained my memory. I am consistent being bereft of doubts, and am ever ready to obey your orders." Now, whereas Arjuna was perplexed at the time of reviewing both the armies at the beginning of the Gita, to find his kith and kin therein, he prayed, "Govinda, how can we be happy after annihilation of our own relatives? Family tradition will be destroyed because of such a war. There will be scarcity of obsequial offerings like rice cakes and so on to the departed ancestors. Mongrelization of castes will take place. We, being wise, are yet ready to commit sin. Why do not we find a way out of committing these sins? Let the armed Kaurava kill me, an unarmed man, in the war, and that death is glorious. Govinda, I am not going to wage war." Saying thus, Arjuna sat down at the back of his chariot. Thus, in the Gita, Arjuna in fact put forward in front of Yogeshwar Krishna a series of big and small questions. For instance, in chapter 2, verse 7, "Please, will you tell me that practice of worship through which I can attain to the absolute good?" In chapter 2, verse 54, "What are the attributes of an enlightened sage?" In verse 1 of chapter 3, "If in your view the way of knowledge is superior, then why do you compel me to do these terrible actions?" In verse 36 of chapter 3, "Even without wishing, under whose guidance does a man commit sin? In verse 4 of chapter 4, your birth is of recent times, whereas the sun was born a long time back. Then how can I believe that you, Krishna, taught Yog to the sun in the distant past, at the time of the beginning of this kalp? In verse 1 of chapter 5, sometimes you praise renunciation, the way of knowledge, and yet at other times you support the way of selfless action. Please tell me, which one of these, finally, is the one by which I can attain to the absolute good? In verse 35 of chapter 6, the mind is very fickle. With slack efforts, what would be his lot? In verses 1 and 2 of chapter 8, Govinda, Krishna, who is it, that supreme being whom you have described? What is the religious knowledge? What are lords of gods and lords of being? Who is the Lord of sacrifice in this body? What is that action? How do you come to be known at the end of time? Thus, Arjuna put forward 7 questions. In verse 17 of chapter 10, Arjuna has evinced curiosity, asking, while meditating incessantly, through what feelings do I call you to mind, to remember you? In verse 4 of chapter 11, he prayed and submitted, I long to see the splendors that have been described by you. In verse 1 of chapter 12, who is the superior possessor of Yog among the devotees who worship you well through unvacillating attentiveness, and those who worship the imperishable, unmanifest Supreme Being? In verse 21 of chapter 14, a man who has surpassed the 3 natural properties is liberated. And how can a man surpass these 3 properties? In verse 1 of chapter 17, what would be the fate of a person who engaged in Yagya with dedication and yet does not follow the procedures as laid down by the scriptures? And in verse 1 of chapter 18, O, the mighty armed, I yearn to learn separately and individually everything about the nature of relinquishment and renunciation. Thus, throughout the Gita, Arjuna continued to put forward questions. The esoteric secrets which could not be asked by him were revealed by Lord Krishna himself. As soon as Arjuna's doubts were dispelled, he was freed from asking questions and said, Govinda, now I am ever ready to obey your instructions. In truth, the questions raised by Arjuna were for the benefit of all mankind, and not for him alone. Without having the answers to these questions, no seeker can progress forward on the path of the highest good. Therefore, to enable a man to obey an enlightened sage teacher, and to progress on the path of the highest good, it is necessary that one should learn the complete teachings of the Gita. Arjuna was convinced and satisfied. In chapter 11, after having revealed his cosmic form, Krishna said in the 54th verse, O Arjuna, a worshipper can directly know this form of mine, acquire its essence, and even become one with it by total and unswerving dedication. And just now he has asked him whether he is rid of his delusion. Arjuna replies that his ignorance is allayed and that his understanding is restored. Now he will act at Krishna's behest. Arjuna's liberation should come along with this realization. He has indeed become whatever he had to be. But Scripture is meant for posterity, and the Gita is here for all of us to avail ourselves of. Thus, the divine message of Yogeshwar Krishna was concluded. At this moment, Sanjay again spoke.
इत्यहं वासुदेवस्य पार्थस्य च महात्मनः संवादमिममश्रौषम् अद्भुतं रोमहर्षणम्.
Sanjay said, "Thus have I heard the mysterious and sublime dialogue of Vasudeva Krishna and the sage like Arjuna. Arjuna is portrayed as a man with a noble soul. He is a yogi, a seeker, a sage rather than an archer set to kill. But how has Sanjay been enabled to hear the dialogue between Krishna and the saintly Arjuna?
व्यासप्रसादात् श्रितवान् एतद् गुह्यमहं परम् योगं योगेश्वरात् कृष्णात् साक्षात् कथयतः स्वयम्.
It is by the blessing of the most revered Vyas that I have heard this transcendental, most mysterious yoga enunciated directly by the Lord of Yoga, Krishna himself. Sanjay regards Krishna as a master of yoga, one who is a yogi himself and who is also endowed with the gift of imparting yoga to others.
Rajan samsmritya संवादमिममद्भुतं केशवार्जुनयोः पुण्यं हृष्यामि च मुहुर्मुहुः.
The recollection of the felicitous and marvelous colloquy between Keshav Krishna and Arjuna transports me, O King Dhritarashtra, to sublime joy, time after time. We too can experience Sanjay's bliss if we remember the sacred dialogue with perfect contentment. Sanjay then recalls the Lord's miraculous bearing and speaks of it.
Tacca samsmritya रूपमत्यद्भुतं हरेः विस्मयो मे महान् राजन् हृष्यामि च पुनः पुनः.
Recalling the amazing visage of the Lord again and again, O King, I am lost in wonder and ecstasy over and over. Sanjay's rapture can be ours also, if we incessantly keep in our minds the aspect of the cherished end. That brings us to the last verse of the Gita, in which Sanjay states his final conclusion.
यत्र योगेश्वरः कृष्णो यत्र पार्थो धनुर्धरः तत्र श्रीर्विजयो भूतिः ध्रुवा नीतिर्मतिर्मम. तत्र श्रीर्विजयो भूतिः ध्रुवा नीतिर्मतिर्मम.
Good fortune, conquest, splendor, and steadfast wisdom abide wherever are Lord Krishna and the noble archer Arjuna. Such is my conviction. Intent contemplation and firm restraint of the senses are Arjuna's bow, the legendary Gandiv. So it is that Arjuna is a sage who meditates with equanimity. So wherever Yogeshwar Krishna and he are, there too dwell the triumph after which there is no defeat, the magnificence of God, and the firmness of resolve that enables one to be constant in this inconstant world. Such is the well-deliberated judgment of Sanjay, of the seer who is gifted with celestial vision. The great archer Arjuna is no longer amidst us, but were steadfast wisdom and the glory that comes with spiritual conquest for him alone? The Gita is a dramatization of an historical event that belonged to a certain time, namely the age that is known as Dwapar. This does not mean, however, that Arjuna's realization of the truth of God came to an end with the seizing of his time. Yogeshwar Krishna has assured us repeatedly that he abides in the realm of the heart. He exists within all of us. He is also within you. Arjuna is a symbol of affectionate devotion, which is but another name of the mind's inclination and dedication to the cherished goal. If a worshipper is endowed with such devotion, perpetual triumph against the demeaning properties of nature is assured. With such devotion, there must always necessarily be steadfast wisdom. Rather than being confined to a certain place, time, or individual, these attainments are universal, forever and for all. So long as beings exist, God must dwell in their hearts, and the soul must impatiently hunger for the Supreme Being, and he who is affectionately devoted to God will attain to Arjuna's status. Every one of us can, therefore, aspire hopefully to the ultimate bliss of direct perception of God. Conclusion. At the beginning of the 18th, the concluding chapter of the Gita, Arjuna wishes to be enlightened on the similarity as well as the distinction between relinquishment and renunciation. Krishna has pronounced a judgment, which is that Yagya, penance, and charity must never be forsaken, for they bring deliverance to men of discernment. So fostering them, while also giving up unrighteous impulses that are inimical to them, is true renunciation. Such renunciation is perfect, but relinquishment with a desire for some profit in exchange is tainted by passion and moral blindness, and it is definitely evil when the prescribed deed is forsaken out of self-deception. Renunciation is the crowning point of resignation. Performance of the prescribed task and the rapture that results from meditation are indeed virtuous, while sensual pleasure is an outcome of infatuation. And the pleasure in which there is no prospect whatsoever of the ultimate union with God undoubtedly issues forth from ignorance. This chapter also sheds light on the nature of renunciation. The resigning of all one has is renunciation. Mere putting on of a certain kind of attire is not renunciation. Absorption in the ordained deed, while leading a life of seclusion, with a due appraisal of one's own strength, or with a sense of self-surrender, is inescapable. Renunciation is the name of the abandonment of all action, along with consummation, and so but a synonym for the final deliverance. That absolution is the crowning point of renunciation. Thus concludes the 18th chapter in the Upanishad of Srimad Bhagavad Gita on the knowledge of the Supreme Spirit, the science of yoga, and the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna entitled Sannyas Yoga, or the Yog of Renunciation. Thus concludes Swami Aggadanand's exposition of the 18th chapter in Yatharth Gita. Hari Om Tat Sat.